We're going to go ahead and start in chapter 21 of Exodus. So now we're going to start getting into a lot of the laws. So what we're going to find out is over the course of Exodus and Leviticus, the 10 Commandments are going to be broken down into 613 individual laws. Now some of these laws, a lot of anti-Christians will actually use these laws against us as if they actually know what these laws are actually intended for. But a lot of these laws in our culture in this day are going to kind of seem odd, okay? But we'll go through them and we'll explain them and everything as we go. So it says, chapter 21, if you buy a Hebrew servant, my goodness. All right, Lord, I prayed before the class. So. All right, it says, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years. But in the 7th year, he shall go free without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. But if the servant declares, I love my master, and my wife and my children do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, and then he will be his servant for life. Okay, so that all sounds very odd, okay?
Where are we at?
We're at chapter 21.
Okay.
So I just read from 1 to 7. So that sounds very odd, but again, we have to understand the culture. And believe it or not, this is actually a miraculous thing, okay? So what this is say like I am in debt, okay? Like I'm not. But say like I'm in debt to somebody that is just a physical person, okay? I cannot pay back that debt. I walk up to the guy and say, look, I owe you, let's say, in our terms and everything, $50,000, okay? Let me work for you, and I will be your servant. You will be my master. Now, that is in total. That doesn't mean I go home at the end of the day. That is, I am now his slave. I will be your slave. And again, we in America think of that with a negative connotation. In this case, it's not. I will be your slave. I will be your servant for 6 years. At the end of that 6 years, in the 7th year, then my debt is completely and totally clear. And I get to go home, okay? Now, if I have a wife and I have children, they're mine. So if I go into this relationship with the wife and children, then I leave the relationship with my wife and children, okay? However, if I go into the relationship, now I'm the servant and I'm the slave, and my master says, hey, I know this girl, here you go, and we eventually get married and we have children. Now, everything that I produce in that time period, including children, belongs to the master. So at the end of the 6 years, I can leave, but my wife and my children are the master's. Okay, they were never mine to begin with. Okay, so what often happens though is, say like I work for him for 6 years. And we see this actually several times in, like, we saw it in Genesis with Joseph and all this kind of stuff. Say like I work for him for 6 years and I'm really good at what I do. And because I'm really good at what I do, the master's taking care of me very well. He's given me a beautiful woman to marry. I have children now. I have a family, all this kind of stuff. The end of the 6 years comes up. I don't want to leave. Out there, I'm nobody. Here, I'm somebody. I'm in charge of his estate. I'm in charge of the other servants. I have a beautiful wife. I have children. I have my own little home in the back. I'm good. I don't want to go nowhere. So what happens is he has to take me, the slave, before the judge. And the reason why he has to do that is to show, look, him by his own testimony wants to stay with me. It's not me forcing him or basically keeping him there with the threat of his wife and kids. Here he is before the judge, and I can proclaim my want and my need to stay where I'm at. And then at that point, I'll be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure why the thing with the ear, and I think that's a little overboard. But nonetheless, that's the way God chose to proclaim for life, I would be his servant. So now I am not working for him to pay off a debt. I am his slave for life. And again, that sounds negative, but you have to understand that a lot of the times, the man would look at the slave almost like a family member. And when he dies, he would leave a good portion of his inheritance to his head slave, because his head slave, his servant, took care of everything in his estate. So it was it was that kind of relationship. It wasn't the slave of grabbing the whip and everything and smacking him in the back and all that stuff. That's not what this is talking about. Okay? You had a question?
Well, to me, that just brings up the fact that Amelia does some reading on the Emancipation Proclamation in the South.
Mm-hmm.
When those slaves were proclaimed free, a large majority of them
Didn't want to leave.
Want to be free. They wanted, because that was their home. They had their family there.
Yep.
They had good standing. They were well treated. So it's basically the same concept.
Yeah, I don't want to go on and everything and sit there and say, oh, slavery was, not as bad as what everybody thinks and stuff like that, because I know in this day and age, like, people with shotguns and everything would try to blow my head off. But the reality is, though, is that, there were black people that had slaves. Slavery was an institution and everything that, quite frankly, has been going on since the dawn of time. Now, there are different forms of slavery. You have the slavery that we saw with, say, with Abraham and Lot, where Lot had been conquered and he was thrown in a cage with all of his family, and the men would be thrown into work camps, and the women and the children and the little girls and everything, they would essentially be slaves for sex or for other purposes and everything. There's that form of slavery, okay? But then there's also the form of slavery that we call slavery, that the Bible calls slavery. It's not really slavery. It's what's called indentured servitude, okay? I owe you. I have nothing to pay you with, so let me work for you. And if you really think about it, at a much more spiritual level, that's really essentially our relationship with God, okay? The word is doulos, okay? Paul sits there and says that I am a doulos for God. In other words, it's like the most intense form of slave that you could think of, okay? I'm not a servant of God. I'm not in love with God. I am a doulos for God. I am an absolute slave for God, okay? What he says, I do. All right? I don't care if he tells me to jump off a mountain, I'm doing it. I know he's got me, okay? And essentially, all of the people that followed Jesus really became that because, as we know, all of them died martyr deaths, except for John. And we don't really know what happened to John. A lot of people will say they do. We don't. We don't actually know what happened to John. We know he did not die a martyr's death, but it's not like we have his body. We don't know what happened to him. So, that's the first part of this. Then it sits there and says, but if a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. If she does not please the master who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her for his son, he must grant her the rights of a daughter. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. So let me put this in. I'm going to read this again in today's wordage, okay, and what exactly this means. If a man sells his daughter, okay, in other words, I owe a bunch of money to somebody. He's got the hots for my daughter, okay? So I say, well, I'll give you my daughter, and you relinquish my debt, okay? So the daughter is now with the man, all right? She is not to go free as male servants do. Why? Because the entire purpose of her giving her to him is to marry her. So it is a different type of bond altogether. It is not a servant. It is now, I have married you, you are my wife, okay? So now it sits there and says, if she does not please the master or who has selected her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. Okay? So in other words, if they're saying, and this isn't a sexual thing, or not necessarily in the back end of it anyway. So for instance, say like he had sex with her and then he found out she was not a virgin. Okay? Well, one, that would mean that he had every right to stone her back then. But two is if he found something unpleasing about her. Now remember, we're still living in the days of Moses and everything where, you know, basically if you didn't like the color of her eyes and everything, Moses would let you write a receipt for divorce. Okay? Not necessarily supposed to be that way, but that's the way he had it. But at this particular time, right now, God is writing down all the rules. Okay? God is giving Moses all of the guidelines for this. So he does not please the master who he has selected her for himself. He must let her be redeemed. In other words, you cannot just kick her out. Okay? You can't just be like, nope, you're not good enough for me. Boom, you're out. All right? You got to let her be redeemed. He has no right to sell her to foreigners because he has broken faith with her. Okay? She came into this relationship believing she was going to be his wife and that he was going to relinquish the debt for her father. Okay? But now, he's having a problem with her. He cannot just bump her out the door and say, well, I'm going to get my money one way or the other. Here, you take this girl and give me the money that the dad was supposed to give me to begin with. Okay? You cannot do that. All right? So, he says, if he selects her for his son, he must grant her for the rights of daughter. So in other words, say it's not for the man. Say like instead of the man having the hots for the girl, he has a son that's like, you know, in his early 20s. And he's like, well, there's a beautiful girl over here. Dad owes me a lot of money and everything. How about I buy the girl and I give her to you? Okay? Then when you do that, you automatically, you're bringing her in to be your family. She is now your daughter-in-law. Okay? That's just part of the deal. So, let's see here. If he marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, and marital rights. Another one. So in other words, this is talking about polygamy, okay, which was common back then. It wasn't as common in the days of Jesus. Not that it didn't happen, but it wasn't as common. But in the days of Moses, right here we're talking about, it was very common. Okay? So in other words, if you marry another woman, the old one's kind of getting a little boring and dull. You marry another woman to kind of spice it up and everything. You can't just pay attention to the new one and not take care of the old one, okay? Can't do that. You've got to handle both of your businesses here. So they're both your wives. You both have to handle them both the exact same. I'm just going to go on record right now as saying, no disrespect, I have absolutely no idea why any man would want two wives at the same time. But nonetheless, that was what evidently was the deal there. So, if he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. So in other words, if you're not going to take care of the daughter or you're not going to take care of the wife, then that means she's allowed to go and she owes you nothing. Neither does the dad. The dad doesn't owe you anything. You bought the daughter, you didn't like the daughter, there is no such thing as a lemon law at this time, you got the daughter. If you want to get rid of the daughter, whatever, but you're not getting any money. Okay? So that's how that goes. Now, as we go down these things, again, these are going to be scenarios where you're just like, who does this? Okay? But you need to understand, God would not have to make these laws if these things did not happen. So what was happening? What was happening was some guy liked some dude's daughter and sat there and said, well, I'll tell you what, you owe me 50 grand. I'll waive the 50 grand and everything, but your daughter's mine. Okay, here's my daughter. I got the daughter. I do whatever I want with the daughter. I get tired of the daughter. I bring the daughter back to dad, and I say, here you go. Here's your daughter. By the way, you still owe me money. She wasn't good enough for 50 grand. That's what was happening. Okay? So God is saying, we're not doing that. Okay? You're going to honor your word. You're going to abide by the covenant that you were entering into. That's how this is going to go. So it says, if anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. However, if it is not done intentionally, but God lets it happen, they are to flee to a place that I will designate. If anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken from my altar and put to death. Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. Anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Okay, so we'll go through those real quick. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death, okay? So, in other words, this is essentially murder, okay? You're not going to be, this isn't talking about self-defense or anything like that. This is coming up with intention, and you are intentionally trying to knock their block off, quite literally, okay? So, however, it is not to be done intentionally, but God lets it happen. They are to flee to a place I will designate. So, he makes the caveat. If it is done unintentionally, if it is not actually meant to happen, then I am going to make what are called sanctuary cities. Okay? We'll see those later. And those sanctuary cities are for people to go have sanctuary when they are committed of a crime or when they are accused of a crime, and they need time to figure it out, explain themselves, whatever the case may be. But it says, if anyone schemes and kills someone deliberately, in other words, literally the actual definition of murder, someone is scheming, they are, you know, what is the definition of the murder that we talked about? The unlawful, help me out here. Premeditated. Could not think of that word for nothing. The unlawful, premeditated murder of another human being. Okay, that is the actual definition. When it says, thou shalt not kill, that is literally verbatim what it means, nothing else. Okay, and so that is what this is. So that person is to be taken from my altar to put to death. Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. Okay, what is one of the 10 commandments? Okay, honor your mother and father. And that is the only commandment that actually comes with a promise of a long life. Okay? Honor your mother and father. Do not attack them. Okay? So anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or still in a kidnapper's possession. So, you know, plain and simple and everything. If you kidnap somebody, it doesn't matter whether they're alive, doesn't matter whether they're dead, doesn't matter whether you sold them, doesn't matter whether they're taken back, doesn't matter. You die. Kidnapping is not allowed. Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. So again, we're going back to that parental role. If people quarrel and one person hits another with a stone or with their fist and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other can get up and walk around outside with a staff. However, the guilty party must pay the injured party for any loss of time and see that the victim is completely healed. So he's setting boundaries now. In other words, me and another guy get into a fist fight, okay? And I knock his, block whoopee, all right? He's not dead, he's not seriously injured, but he needs to go have a couple days bed rest, okay? If he can get up and walk around, then he's not that seriously injured, okay? Which means I don't need to be put to death for that altercation, all right? But I have now taken time, energy, and possibly finances away from him because I did that. So this is honestly the beginning of what we call tort law, okay? This is a lawsuit, all right? It's even worded the exact same way. If somebody sues me, they're suing me to make them whole, okay? I have taken something from them, whether it be finances or whatever, and I am now being held by the court liable to make them whole, okay? So that's what has to happen here. It says, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Now, I know that sounds really, 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 really harsh, okay? But you have to understand in everything that when it comes to the slavery stuff, you have to have the boundaries, okay? If they are not your property, then they're not your slave, okay, and vice versa. So in this day and age and in this lifestyle and where this in this part of the world and everything, that's the way it went, okay? It wasn't, like I said, even if it's an indentured servitude, it's not like, okay, well, I'm tired of them working for you now. No. When you become an indentured servant, you literally take on every aspect of being a slave. This person now owns me. Okay, he owns everything from me. If I have children, they're not my children, they're his children. My life is now his life. That's the way it goes. So if somebody beats their male or female and they die, okay, that person needs to be punished because they were irresponsible with what they had. They were irresponsible with what God has given them, okay? But if you beat them because they've done something wrong, and here's the thing, if you really think about it, if you're the kind of person and everything that's going to beat somebody, you're going to kill them eventually, okay? It's going to happen. You're going to kill them, okay? In which case you're going to be held accountable. Now, if you're punishing your slave, it's probably not going to happen all that often, okay? So they're all just old notes if you got them all already. So that is a different story entirely. And that's the reason why he puts in the way he puts it in, okay? The servant has to be able to be punished by the master, okay? If the master has no authority to physically punish the servant is not a servant. The servant is just somebody that's kind of milking off of them until something bad goes wrong, and then they're like, neener, neener, what are you going to do? Okay? They have to have that authority over them. Okay? It's the exact same way as children are now. Okay? So, if we lived in a society, which quite frankly a lot of parents nowadays and everything live by this rule anyway, but if we lived in a society where it is completely and totally against the law to spank your kids, okay, what do you think those kids are going to grow up to be like? All right? It's literally going to be, what are you going to do? Get off the PlayStation. Why? What are you going to do? I ripped the PlayStation out of the wall. Fine, I'll go play something else. Okay? There's going to be constant pushback and there's going to be constant disobedience because you just do not have the ability to, I said you're going to go to bed now. There's an immediate response, okay? All right, big time. I have not spanked my children in probably 7 years. The last time I had to spank them, I remember it like it was yesterday. It didn't happen very often, but when it did, it did. The last time I ever had to spank my two boys, we were in Alabama, and they were bouncing up and down on a bed. And I went in and I said, knock it off, lay down on the bed, it's bedtime. And I go outside. And they do it again. And I walk back in and I said, telling you twice, knock it off, get into bed, it's bedtime. I'm not saying it a third time. And I walked out. And I guess they thought Dad wasn't going to do anything. And I walked back in after the third time, and they looked at me like, he's going to say it. And I was like, I told you I wasn't going to say it. And I'm not one of the dads and everything that grab the kids and wham, 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 wham. I'm good with this. I know exactly where to go. Sweet spot, right there, one shot. And man, you should have seen my son Gabe. Like, he couldn't even get it out. I was like, I told you, I'm not saying it a third time. It's bedtime. Go to bed. And after they got done crying for about 5 minutes and everything, they went to sleep. That was the last time I ever spanked my kids. Okay? You have to be able to do that. You do. Anybody who says otherwise has never been a parent, and if they are a parent, they ain't a very successful one. You have to be able to do that. What was it? I think it was like 3 weeks ago, my son Gabriel, he's getting froggy. He's like 16 years old, and he's getting the puffed up chest, and he works out, and he thinks he's got muscles. And he said something to me. Oh, he was talking back to his boss at Six Flags, and I said, Gabe, you can't do that. And I gave him the biblical reasons why. And I said, listen, I know what you're doing. You're hearing your dad from his old stories and everything. I said, son, I want you to be better than me. You can't do that. And then he starts kind of, not as bad, but kind of mouthing off to me. To which I put my cup down and I looked at him and I said, son, you're going to need to learn a lesson here. And I said, I really hope I never have to teach it to you full force, but here's the lesson. Your boss can fire you. I will lay you out. And he's just kind of looking at me going, I got to finish the dishes. I said, good call. So, it's just one of those things. We have to have that ability. So I know people look at this, and I've heard this argument so many times from people. It's just like, well, if God is so good, why does he let you sell your daughter? It's like, okay, you're not even understanding the context of what is going on there, so I'm not even going to try to defend it. But that's what's going on there. So it says, anyone who beats their, okay, I did that. If, 22, verse 22, if people are fighting Okay, I'm glad we got to this. So before I read this and everything, I just want to preface this with one thing. If anybody ever sits there and says that abortion is not in the Bible, I want you to highlight this. Okay? So it says, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman, and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take a life for life, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, or bruise for bruise. Okay? So if anybody sits there and says, well, abortion isn't in the Bible, yes it is. There it is. Okay? If there is a skirmish or anything like that, or for any reason whatsoever, the child that is in the mother's womb is wounded and or killed, then by God's law, whoever did that has to be punished in the exact same way, even if it's up to his life. Okay? So without even getting into the whole, well, when does life start, whatever the case may be, it's right here.
But isn't it also covered by the definition of murder because it's premeditated? I mean, you have to make an appointment and you plan.
Absolutely, 100%.
So it is murder.
The problem is that people will argue, well, if it's in your belly, it's not an actual life.
Yes, it is.
I agree, but I'm just saying that's what people will argue.
Because the life is
what
in
I'm
the
saying
body.
is
That's
this
the
tells you right here, it doesn't matter what your view on life is. It says right here,
And
if it's in the womb.
Separate DNA. It's not your body. That thing about your body.
Oh,
They don't
trust
know
me,
anything
I
about
completely
biology.
agree.
Sorry,
No, you're fine. I completely and totally agree.
Because,
I'm just saying that you will run into these arguments in this messed up world we live in.
well, they're all ignorant.
Yeah, where they'll sit there and they'll say and everything, well, if it's part of you, if it's in your body and everything, it's not actually a life, to which, you know, but we're also dealing with a civilization and everything that believes Harry can become Sally, so.
Yeah, that's bad.
But it says, if a bull gores a man or a woman to death, the bull is to be stoned to death. So God ain't even letting out the animals out of this, okay? So it says, and its meat must not be eaten, but the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has been the habit of goring, and the owner has been warned, but has not kept it penned up, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull is to be stoned, and its owner is also to be put to death. Okay? So again, we see this in stuff like tort law, okay? If a wild dog and everything is running around and it bites somebody, the dog's going to probably be put to death, okay? But if it's my dog, and I know, and I'm responsible for that dog, and that dog gets out of my fence and it goes bite somebody, now I'm liable, okay? So it says, however, if payment is demanded, the owner may redeem his life by the payment of whatever is demanded. So in other words, if you don't kill me, I'll pay you whatever you ask. So this law also applies if the bull gores a son or daughter. If the bull gores a male or a female slave, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver to the master of the slave, and the bull is to be stoned to death. If anyone uncovers a pit or digs one and fails to cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the one who opened the pit must pay the owner for the loss and take the dead animal in exchange. If anyone's bull injures someone else's bull and it dies, the two parties are to sell the live one and divide both the money and the dead animal equally. However, if it was known that the bull had the habit of goring, yet the owner did not keep it penned up, the owner must pay the animal for animal and take the dead animal in exchange. So again, he's just laying out these guidelines, and it sounds ridiculous, okay? But the reality is that God knows that he is dealing with 2 million people, okay? 2 million people in the desert that will eventually become a different 2 million people for the most part, because all these people are going to die, except for Joshua and Caleb. It's going to become a new generation that we read about in Deuteronomy, and then eventually they're going to go over and they're going to take the land, and they're going to build their own civilization and their own society. And he is trying to implant this. You notice he doesn't do that after they go over and after they do all the killing and everything. He's trying to get this burned into their brain now. He is trying to change 2 million peoples into a people, into a civilization, okay, into an orderly people. And that's how you do it, is with law. And that's what he's trying to give them. You got to remember, they've been living under Egyptian law this entire time, and they were slaves while they were doing it. Yes?
Okay. In the whole scheme of things, probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but you skipped over 26.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, about if a man hits a maidservant or maidservant in the eye and destroys it.
Okay, yeah. If an owner hits a male or female slave in the eye and destroys it, it must let the slave go free and compensate for the eye. For an owner who knocks out the tooth of a male or female slave, let the slave go free for compensation of the tooth. So there you go. That's kind of curious, though. Like, so if I beat my slave and everything, as long as he's okay in a couple days, we're cool. But if I knock out his tooth, well, then he gets to go free. So, again, some of these laws and everything, you kind of look, it's like, okay, I don't understand that. But the reality is we don't need to understand it. We can look at a lot of this and we can kind of see how it pertains to our lives in kind of distant ways. But the reality is that this is the law for the Israelites. Okay? In AD 50, there will be a council. It's they call it the Council of Jerusalem. And in AD 50, it's because all these Gentiles are wanting to come in, and a lot of the Jews are having problems with it. They're like, well, they're not Jews. How can they be a follower of the Jewish Messiah if they're not Jews? And if they're not following our laws and our regulations and everything like that God gave us, how can they follow the Jewish Messiah if they're not doing that? And it was a big to-do, okay? Because remember, if you're a Gentile and you want to become a Jew and you want to follow the Jewish Messiah under that law, you would have had to have been circumcised. You would have had to follow all the dietary laws. I mean, you would have had to learn all 613 laws. It was a big to-do. And eventually what they all came up with was, and Peter was there, James was there, all the apostles were there, and what they came up with is no, they do not have to follow the Jewish law. As Christians, they are not bound to this, okay? Quite frankly, what they say is why would we put the yoke on them that we ourselves couldn't carry? We can't do this, so why are we forcing them to do this, okay? No. This is Jesus Christ says he came to fulfill the law. The law is complete, okay? So we as Christians are not bound by this. It doesn't mean we shouldn't know it to some degree, and certainly doesn't mean we shouldn't respect it. And especially when it comes to like broken down into the 10 Commandments, we should definitely know those and definitely respect those. But it's like Jesus says, if you follow the 2 commandments that he gave us, which is, love your neighbor like yourself, and love God with all your heart, your strength, your might, your soul, everything that you got, then all those other commandments just fall in line. You're going to follow those commandments by proxy. So, essentially, we don't have to follow any of this. Okay? And I said when I say that with caveat of, doesn't mean this isn't wisdom, and doesn't mean that we shouldn't know it and shouldn't abide by it to some degree, but we're not bound by it. So, but it says, verse 22 or chapter 22 says, whoever steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it and sells it must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox, 4 sheep for the sheep. If a thief is caught breaking in at night and is struck a fatal blow, the defender is not guilty of bloodshed. But if it happens at sunrise, the defender is guilty of bloodshed. So why the difference? To be honest with you, if I told you, it'd just be sheer speculation. If I had to take a guess, is that, remember, these guys didn't have electricity. So if it's at night, you're basically swinging the swing, But if it's at sunrise, you can see what's going on to better assess the situation, call for help, whatever the case may be. But again, that's speculation. I guess that's the reason why. Says anyone who steals must certainly make restitution, but if they have nothing, they must be sold to pay for their theft. If the stolen animal is found alive in their possession, whether ox or donkey or sheep, they must pay back double. If anyone grazes their livestock in a field or vineyard and lets them stray and they graze in someone else's field, the offender must make restitution from the best of their own field or vineyard. If a fire breaks out and spreads in the thorn bushes so that it burns shocks of grain or standing grain or the whole field, the one who started the fire must make restitution. If anyone gives a neighbor silver or gold for safekeeping and they are stolen from the neighbor's house, the thief, if caught, must pay back double. But if the thief is not found, the owner of the house must appear before the judges, and they must determine whether the owner of the house has laid hands on the other person's property. In all cases of illegal possession of an ox, donkey, sheep, a garment, or any other lost property about which somebody says, this is mine, both parties are to bring their cases before the judges. The one whom the judges declare guilty must pay back double to the other. You know, when I read that, the first thing I think of is Solomon. You guys know the story of Solomon and the baby?
Yeah.
So that's pretty intense, you know. So for anybody who doesn't know that story, basically, a woman comes up and everything and has a child. Another woman comes up and says, that's my child. And she says, no, it's not. This is my child. And the woman's like, no, that's my baby. And the other woman's like, no, it's not. It's my baby. So Solomon sits there and says, fine, let's just be done with this and everything. Take the baby, cut it in half, and give them each half. And the one woman's like, no, it's okay. She can have the baby. And Solomon's like, that's the mother. Now, just imagine for a second and everything, if neither one of them were the mom, they just wanted them for welfare, like that would end really badly. But, you know, I guess you got to take a gamble when you're king. So, but yeah, no, it's just one of those kind of things that it's like, yeah, they have to decide which one is actually the owner of it. It says, if anyone gives a donkey, an ox, sheep, or any other animal to their neighbor for safekeeping, and it dies or injured or is taken away while no one is looking, the issue between them will be settled by taking of an oath before the Lord that the neighbor did not lay hands on the other person's property. The owner is to accept this, and no restitution is required. But if the animal was stolen from the neighbor, restitution must be made to the owner. If it was torn to pieces by a wild animal, the neighbor shall bring in the remains as evidence, and shall not be required to pay for the torn animal. If anyone borrows an animal from their neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner is not present, they must make restitution. But if the owner is with the animal, the borrower will not have to pay. If the animal was hired, the money paid for the hire covers the loss. So again, basically tort law. Okay, it's basically, you know, when can I actually sue you for restitution? When can I not? How do we handle this? When do we have to go before the judges? When will an oath do? That kind of stuff is basically what all this is talking about. So social responsibility. If a man, this is going to be good. So if a man seduces a virgin who is not pledged to be married and sleeps with her, he must pay the bride price, and she shall be his wife. In other words, you're not getting out that easy. If you sleep with the girl, then you need to pay the bride price, and then, which is basically the money that you would pay the father for the daughter, and essentially you have to marry her. Okay. It says if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must still pay the bride price for the virgin. So these are all going to be individual things. So why is that? Okay, because essentially you've ruined her. Okay, flat out, you've ruined her. All right. I cannot stress the difference between this and what is you see on YouTube and everything nowadays. Okay, as far as the idea of sex. All right. I was literally like flipping through stuff, and normally I'm watching stuff with Star Trek and all that kind of stuff. And every now and again, like a video will pop up, and I'm like, okay, what's this about? This is going to be pretty funny. And there was a girl on there sitting there saying that guys like it when a girl has a high body count. That's what they call it nowadays, a body count. How many people they've slept with. Because that means that she's desirable, and that means that she's experienced. Okay?
And she's a hoe.
So that's my sister, everybody. So that is the idea. In this day and age, he has to pay the bride price, because if she's a virgin and now she has had sex and she's not married, if she's lucky not to get stoned, but either way, no man is ever going to marry her. No man is ever going to marry her. Okay? Because he is expecting a virgin. All right? So that's the way it is. So it says, do not allow a sorceress to live. Okay? So there are two ways to look at this. Number one, you can look at it in the way that sorcery does not exist. Okay? Magic does not exist. And anybody who is a sorceress or is pretending, I guess would be the word, or insinuating that they have some magical ability, one, they're a liar, they're a fraud, and ultimately they are worshiping something that they ought not to be worshiping. Okay, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that magic, in a sense, does exist. And if a sorceress is actually conjuring up stuff, she is not conjuring anything up by the power of God. She is conjuring things up with the power of Satan. Okay? There is a story, it's not in the Bible, but it has to do with people that are in the Bible. You hear, I think there's one time in the book of Acts and everything, one or two times, you hear of a gentleman called Simon the Sorcerer. Okay, Simon the Sorcerer has a much bigger, he's kind of like Enoch. He has a much bigger footprint outside of the Bible than he does in. Okay, Simon the Sorcerer is actually what the person who a lot of people believe truly started Gnosticism. Okay, Gnosticism was the search for the real truth, the hidden truth. Okay, and if you read a lot of the Gnostic Gospels, they go all over the place. I mean, literally, like, there's a Gnostic Gospel that talks about how God the Father was actually a created being. He is actually a child of pure goodness and pure evil. Okay? It goes all over the place. I mean, it's all about the hidden truth that nobody actually knows. But there's a story about Simon the Sorcerer about how he actually dies. And the way he dies is, that's why, because of this story and everything, most people put Peter, like him and Simon the Sorcerer were like arch enemies to a degree. So Simon the Sorcerer was in the middle of a crowd. And Simon the Sorcerer all of a sudden started levitating up. And he was performing miracles in front of everybody. And he was just levitating in front of a mass crowd. And everybody just saw him flying in air. But Peter saw why he was flying. He was flying because two devils were carrying him. And Peter on the ground began to pray. And he banished the devils. And the devils disappeared, and Simon Sorcerer fell to his death. Okay. So, now whether that story happened or not, I can't say it's not biblical. But the thing is, though, is that sorcery, you can look at it one of two ways. Like I said, you can look at it as it's not real. And we'll encounter this in the book of Judges, okay? Because there's going to be a sorcerer that is going to bring up, a dead figure, and you kind of listen to the story, and you're like, okay, it doesn't really elaborate. Is she actually speaking to the dead figure, or is she just saying what is just kind of obvious? You're all going to die, okay? That's pretty much what he was saying. Or excuse me, that's not in Judges. That's in 1 Samuel. So anyway, you can read it either way. It says, anyone who has sexual relations with an animal is to be put to death.
I'm sorry.
I got nothing for that one. So it says, whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord must be destroyed. So again, I want to point out, okay, he's not saying anybody who sacrifices to little wooden things that aren't real or whatever. At this point in time, he's just saying anybody who sacrifices to another god. Okay, he's not putting his foot down on the other gods' things yet. He's not doing that yet. He will do that later. He is not doing that now. But what he is saying is that, remember, you shall not worship any other god before me. Part of that is sacrifice. The other part of that is that sacrificing in this day and age often had to do with children. Okay? People would sacrifice their children. When Abraham heard that God's word and said, I want you to sacrifice my kid, or your kid, there is a reason why that was not incredibly shocking to him. Okay? He didn't understand it, and we learned about this in Hebrews. He didn't understand it because he's like, well, wait a minute. Isaac is the one who you said the promises was going to come through. Okay? But it wasn't like, you're asking me to kill my son? You're asking me to sacrifice my firstborn? Because many gods did. Okay? Many people believe that the gods that they worshipped required them to sacrifice their firstborn sons. Okay? Solomon wound up worshiping gods that sacrificed children. Okay? So, we're not to do that. Do not sacrifice to other gods. Alright? You listen to me. You sacrifice to me, me only. It says, do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. So, again, somebody coming into your land, staying there for a time, wanting to get to know the people, possibly even becoming part of the people, do not mistreat that. You've been there, you know what it feels like. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do, and they cry out to me, I will certainly hear their cry, and my anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless. So as if you lend money to one of my people among you who is needy, do not treat it like a business deal. Charge no interest. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it by sunset, because that cloak is the only covering your neighbor has. What else can they sleep in? And when they cry out to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate. Do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. So do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. I know in this day and age, and we're all guilty of this, I know it. I know in this day and age and everything, it's really easy, whether you're a Democrat or Republican and everything, to curse, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, all that kind of stuff. But we have to realize that irregardless of the fact and everything, and don't quote me as saying Brian said don't go vote, because that's not what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, we can go vote all we want. God's in control. God is putting exactly who he wants in that position. Even if that person is not doing things that are godly, okay? Because he's still in control. So, now, let me preface this, because we'll talk about this later in a different light. It won't contradict itself, but it will kind of fulfill the argument, I guess. If Joe Biden is making law that is basically just really bad, okay? Really bad policy, all right? Going to give all of our stuff to China, and, everybody needs to be on food stamps, okay? That kind of stupidity, all right? It doesn't mean that we should not, argue it. It does not mean that we should not vote against it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't elect leaders and everything. It doesn't mean any of that, okay? What it means is, what he's talking about here is that I should not be going to the White House, banging on the door, picket fences, whatever the case may be and everything, screaming and yelling, hollering and hooting, trying to assassinate, anything stupid like that, my leader, okay? At the end of the day, he is my president, okay? I don't like him very much, but he's still my president. That's the way God puts this. Now, and he does this, we think Biden is bad and everything. He says this, Peter says this, when he's in Rome under the rule of Nero, which Nero is the guy that kills Peter, okay, and a whole lot of other Christians. Nero was horrible. And he still says, praise the emperor, okay? He's the emperor. So, now, when it comes time and everything, what if Joe Biden all of us sat there and said, well, church is now illegal. Okay? You go to church, you're gonna go to jail. Does that mean we should be like, praise Joe Biden? No. Because God has given us the law, and that law supersedes what Biden says. And I think we actually talked about this in the sermon last week. You can see that time and time and time and time again throughout the Bible. Okay? In the book of Daniel, Daniel's three friends. Hold on, I never get the Shadrach. I can never get the first one. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Yeah, I always have a hard one with the first one. So anyway, they're told, bow down and worship this statue, or you're all going to get thrown in the fire. And they're all like, King, Lord, or not Lord, but King, Emperor. Hey, you're cool, okay? We acknowledge who you are, and you are our King. We will praise you. We're not worshiping you. We worship God. We're not bowing down to you. We bow down to God. Okay, there's a disconnect there. And that wasn't good enough for him. And he threw him into the fire. Well, we saw how that ended. But the thing is, though, is that, so there has to be a line. Okay? So, notice what he says, do not blaspheme God or curse the ruler of your people. In other words, understand the roles that each one of them have to play, because I know some people will automatically just go, why am I not getting my just deserts? Why am I not getting what I deserve? Why is God not, giving me? Why is God, giving somebody like, I don't know, pick a rich person you don't like and everything. Why does he have all this stuff? P. Diddy. Let's pick on P. Diddy. Everybody else is. So why is that guy a multimillionaire and, I'm over here struggling and stuff like that? Don't do that. God doesn't want to hear that crap. It's just, it doesn't make any sense. God is God. God's in control. If you're going to be angry with God because you don't understand everything, you're going to be angry with God a lot, because you're never going to understand what God knows. So, it says, do not hold back offerings from your granaries or your vats. So, be giving. It says, you must give the firstborn of your sons. You must give me the firstborn of your sons. Do the same with your cattle and your sheep. Let them stay with their mothers for 7 days, but give them to me on the 8th day. Okay, give them to me on the 8th day. Doesn't mean sacrifice them, okay? What it means is that is the day that they are to be circumcised. That is the day that and this if I'm not mistaken and everything, this kind of goes with the Catholic belief and everything of when they were baptized as babies, okay? On the 6th or on the 8th day, they are to be consecrated to the Lord. All right? So we would call it a dedication. But on the 8th day, they are to be consecrated to the Lord. Now, the difference is, in this culture, on the 8th day, that's also when they got their name. And to be brutally honest with you, I kind of like that idea. I mean, I always had my kids' names in the back of my head anyway. That was a big contention and everything with me and my wife, whichever one it was at the time. But seriously, it would be like, well, I got a name for the kid. I'm like, no. Like, what do you mean, no? I'm like, no. I name the children. I'm the father. I've got their names planned. I name them. Plain and simple. You got all their life to ruin them. I'm naming them. So, and I did. I had Haley's name. I actually made Haley's name when I was 13 years old. I came up with my son Gabriel's name when I was 16 years old. I was actually washing dishes at Denny's, and I said, Gabriel Alexander, that is a cool name. That is an amazing name. Then we found out we were going to have Luke, and I was like, I always wanted to just look down and go, Luke, I am your father.
You would.
So I came up with Luke Ryan. But I named my children. But I just think that's a really cool idea. Get to know the kid. And then, but see, I'll be honest with you. If I would have done that, they would have been named Whiny, Smelly. I mean, there's exceptions to the rule. I don't know. But anyway, so it says, you are to be my holy people. So do not eat the meat of an animal torn by a wild beast. Throw it to the dogs. Okay, so again, don't... Okay. Every time I tell this story, there's always somebody that sits there and says, what's wrong with that? But when I was working at Mr. Reuter, there was a guy there that went hunting all the time. And he calls up the office, and he goes, guys, I got to be honest with you. I got to take half a day off, man. And they're just like, why? What's going on? I just hit a deer, and I got to get this thing dressed. And I was like, he's not seriously going to, cut open roadkill and everybody's just like, what, man, that's good. I'm like, dude, you're going to taste radiator. I'm like, but whatever. Evidently that's a thing. If you hit a fresh deer and you got the knife with you, go to town. But God says, you're my holy people. Don't do that.
It's not a wild beast. A car is not a wild beast.
Depends on the car. You ever seen a Charger? Man, those things, I don't know. I just, there's something about it that it's just... Every single time I think of that story, I keep thinking of the grandma from Beverly Hillbillies going, slow down, that looks like a good one. I just can't. If somebody told me that they were going to fix me deer hit by a van, I would just be like, I'll pass. I can't. So it says, do not spread false reports. Do not help with a guilty person by being a malicious witness. So in other words, don't lie. If you're going to court, do not lie, okay? Tell the truth. Do not try to cover for somebody with your lies. Because, to be brutally honest with you, a lot of times it's found out. So it says, do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. When you give testimony in the lawsuit, do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd, and do not show favoritism to a poor person in the lawsuit. So in other words, judge the person as they are. Do not sit there and feel sorry for somebody because of a particular situation or whatever the case may be. If they're guilty, they're guilty. If they're innocent, they're innocent. That's what they need to be judged by. But what God sits there and also says, which is a huge deal nowadays, and honestly it has been for, thousands of years, is do not buckle to peer pressure. Okay? Just because the crowd is doing something, that does not necessarily make it right. Right now, you have these two gigantic opposites that are literally just mass destroying cities and everything like that. You have those that are pro-Israel, you have those that are anti-Israel and all that stuff. And to be brutally honest with you, most of these people are just fighting off of emotion. That's all they're doing. They're just fighting off of emotion. There are people that have literally been inhabited by demons, it seems like, and everything, that are just anti-Israel. And I'm not going to sit there and say in everything that I'm all for Israel's policies, or I even think they're doing the entirely right thing in what they're doing. But what I'm not going to do is be anti-Israel. Okay, God tells us, they are my firstborn sons. He blesses Israel will be blessed. Okay, God's got that. All right. So at the end of the day, God will handle that situation. All right. I'm certainly not going to be doing what either one of these two parties are doing, which is basically, like I said, they're just fueling each other. Okay? Do not follow the crowd. And the reality is that one of the reasons why he doesn't want you to follow the crowd is because the more you're in the crowd, and this may sound silly, but it's the truth, the more you're in the crowd, the more you hear the crowd and you don't hear God. Okay? You don't hear what he has for you. You're hearing what everybody else is telling you. I sat there and for those who don't know this, I can't remember if I talked about this in last class, but for those who don't know this and everything, I was recently interviewed and considered for a very top position as a lead plumber in Children's Hospital, okay? And it was a very high salary, and I went and interviewed for it. The first time, interview went great. Went and interviewed for the second time. It seemed to go great too. The one thing that I didn't apparently have was I didn't have like this really good experience and everything reading blueprints, just because I've never been a new construction plumber and stuff, which was fine. But the thing that I kept, I talked to so many people about this, and everybody had this visceral reaction. Okay, it was either, man, you got to take that. Man, you got to take that's an amazing job, or that is the worst, stupidest idea. You own your own business. What are you doing? It was like this visceral reaction either way. And I just kept praying, and I'm just like, God, make this decision for me. I want to do what's right. I want to do what you want me to do. Just please make this decision for me, okay? And sure enough, he did. I texted him the next day and everything, and he said, we love you. We thought you were great, but unfortunately, because of your lack of blueprints, we're going to look somewhere else. And I was like, cool. I wasn't upset in any way. I was like, sweet, okay? Because it was made for me. Okay, now I don't have to wonder, did I do the right thing? Did God have something else for me? Evidently, God has me right where I need to be, and God said, stay put. So that's what I'm doing. But if I were to listen to all the people around me, it gets very hectic. So it says, if you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it. If you see the donkey or someone who hates you fallen down under the load, do not leave it there. Be sure to help them with it. In other words, just be kind. There are so many people in this world that you're going to have problems with, that you're going to, have issues with and everything like that. And believe me, I have had many. But at the end of the day, you see them with a flat, pull over, help them out, kill them with kindness kind of thing. It says, do not deny justice to your poor people in their lawsuits. Have nothing to do with a false charge, and do not put an innocent or honest person to death, for I will not acquit the guilty. So again, don't lie. Just judge people based off of what they've actually done. And when I say judge, I don't mean morally judge. I mean, in this particular instance, it's obviously talking about like a judicial judge. The reality is there are a lot of people in jail that don't need to be there. There's a lot of people that are not in jail that do need to be there. And unfortunately, a lot of people are in jail because of just things that are not right. It's because of the, bad judicial system, or somebody had a grudge or something like that. And that happens more than you think. So it says, do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds those who see and twist the words of the innocent. It says, do not oppress a foreigner with yourselves, for yourselves know how it feels to be foreigners, because you were foreigners in Egypt. So, the Sabbath laws. Okay, so this is going to be good. So it says, for 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest your crops. But during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Then the poor among your people may get food from it. The wild animals may eat what is left. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. 6 days do your work, but on the 7th day do not do work, so that your ox and your donkey may rest, and so that the slave born in your household and the foreigner living among you may be refreshed. Be careful to do everything that I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods, and do not let them be heard on your lips. Mm-hmm. So he says quite a few things here. First thing is very interesting. Okay, this is one of those kind of things and everything. And Bible history. This is pretty wild. So, for 6 years you are to sow your fields and harvest your crops. But during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unused. Okay, so they follow this law. So they follow this law all the way, if you do the math backwards, all the way to the days of the judge Samson. Okay? In the days of the judge Samson, somebody eventually stopped. And you can see how that would happen. 6 years, now everybody's not going to plant anything. But one guy's like, if I planted my grain, nobody else is going to do it. And I'm going to get a whole lot of money because I'm going to own the market. So he does it. And everybody's looking around waiting for the lightning to strike, and it never does. So 6 more years go around. Another 7th year. He did it. Nothing happened to him. That guy became rich. I'm going to do it too. So somebody else starts doing it. And a few decades later, nobody's following this law. There's a problem though. Just because God doesn't strike with lightning at that particular moment doesn't mean he's not waiting in the wings. So later on down the line, the Israelites will be cast away to Babylon. They will be cast away for 70 years. The reason why they're cast away for 70 years is because for 490 years, they stopped following this law. And for every year that they did not let the land go fallow, they were placed in Babylon for 1 year. So he waited almost 500 years after they started to commit this sin. And then he said, okay, time's up. Justice needs to be served. You did not follow my law for 70 years. So you're going to go somewhere now for 70 years. And you're going to pay up. So he wasn't kidding. Why is that? Why does he want us to do that? Now, in this particular case and everything, so for the 6 days, okay, on the 7th day is supposed to be his day, okay? It's supposed to be the Sabbath. We're supposed to rest. We're supposed to honor God. We're supposed to do all these things, the Israelites anyway. Okay, that's what that is for. But an entire year, that is a long time to not be able to grow food. What God is trying to teach us in that year is, trust me, I am going to make sure you have enough food in those 6 years that you're going to be able to store up and you're going to be fine that 7th year. Okay? Look what happened with Egypt. God knew that the 7 years of famine was coming, so he gave them 7 years of plenty first. And he said, this is going to happen. Get ready for it. I'm going to give you an abundance of food. Okay? And when I'm talking about an abundance, think about that for a second. 7 years of famine. Nothing growing. How much food do you think they had to grow, not only for Egypt, but for all the surrounding civilizations coming to get that food? Okay? I mean, it was nuts how much food they grew in those 7 years. So, he's saying, trust me. And this is exactly what happens when they go over into the land. And we talked about this, I think, the last couple of classes. 12 people go over to check out the land of Canaan. 10 of them come back, say, nothing doing. These guys are on steroids. There is no way we can win. Joshua and Caleb are like, God says we can do it. We can do it. What's the problem? Okay? And he says, for every day, which was 40 days, every day you were over there not trusting me, you're going to be in this wilderness. One of the worst things that we can do to God, and it is abundant over and over and over and over again, one of the worst things that we can do to God is not trust him. It's a slap in the face. Absolute slap in the face. Think about it for a second. From our own personal perspective, our own personal lives, okay? Think and just write down all the times that God has been faithful. All the times God has had your back. All the times you've been up against the wall and you didn't possibly think you were getting out of it, and somehow, miraculously, everything was okay. Somehow, God had your back. And after all of those things in your own personal life, not even something you get out of the Bible, in your own personal life, you look at all those things, and then you look up at him and say, but I really don't want to give you this much this week. I'm not going to have enough left at the end. Okay? Not to turn this into a tithing thing, but seriously, that's one of the things we have a hard time trusting him with. Okay? It's like, like I got bills I got to pay. Lord, you understand. And he's just looking at you going, you idiot. If you actually trusted me, you wouldn't have to worry about those. Okay? So that's the thing is we have to trust him. And he gets very offended when we do not. He got offended when they didn't trust him across the river, when they were in the land of the Canaanites. He gets offended when they don't trust him with this, and he makes him pay for it. So that is something that everything that we have to learn in our own personal lives is we have to learn to trust God. I sat there and I was talking to my mom before this class started. And I sat there and I told my wife last night when I went to bed, I said, I got a lot of praying to do. And she goes, why? And I said, because, and I don't really talk to Lori about financial stuff that much because I usually have it all in hand. I said, I got taxes coming up by the 15th of next month. I got bills I got paid and everything like that. I'm behind. I said, this is one of the first months and everything I'm behind. I said, I got a lot of praying to do. And I said, I can't. I'm sunk. Time to tag God in. Sorry I waited till the 20th. But time to tag him in. And sure enough, today I got $3,000 jobs. I got one $3,000 job coming up. I got another job that I scheduled a long time ago that's going to be $2,000. I'm going to be doing that next week. It's like just comes on. And that is absolutely God. That is 100% God. I'm in trouble. I need help. Please help me. I got you, bro. Don't worry. And it's just something that we have to learn how to do. It took me a long time to truly learn how to do it, and I won't even now say I'm an expert at it, but I've gotten a lot better over the years. It says, be careful to do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. So again, he's doubling down on this again. He is telling them, again, this has to do with trust. Something's not going your way. Do not turn to another god. You come to me. I will fix it in my time. You chill. Okay? And I know that's a very New Age expression of that verse, but that's what he's trying to tell them. And it's exactly the opposite of what they do. Just as soon as... Well, how many pages? Let's see here. Probably 3 or 4 pages away after we get done with the Ark of the Covenant and stuff like that, the tabernacle. So... Okay, so we are in 23. He is telling them, be careful, do everything I have said to you. Do not invoke the names of other gods. Do not let them be heard on your lips. Chapter 32, Moses has been up on Mount Sinai for about 40 days. They think he's dead. They think the God that brought him out here was playing a sick practical joke on him. We need a really strong God. Let's invoke the god Apis. and let's go ahead and get all of our gold rings and earrings and everything. We're going to put them in a smelting pot, and we're going to make a golden bowl. To which God tells Moses, by the way, they're making a god down there. I'm going to kill all them, and I'm just going to start over with you, okay? Be right back. To which Moses says, whoa, I'll fix it. I promise. Okay? Literally, that was God's response. Tired of playing with these guys, made this perfectly clear. They are literally making a god down there right now. I'll be back. I got something I got to handle. Okay, and again, married couple, Moses is like, not a good idea, I'll take care of it. And, in fact, he does take care of it. He goes down, melts down the bull into water, and makes 3,000 people drink from it, and they all die. Which is a flip side of the story of when Peter evangelizes after he gets the Holy Spirit, and 3,000 people join the church. It's a mirror image of the story. Okay? But at the end of the day, God is telling them right now, don't do that, okay? Do not invoke another God. I am your God. I am a jealous God. Trust me. So, it says 3 times a year, you are to celebrate a festival to me. Celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, as I commanded you. Do this at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, for in that month you came out of Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. Celebrate the festival of harvest with the first fruits of the crops you sow in your field. Celebrate the festival of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather your crops from the field. 3 times a year, all men are to appear before the sovereign Lord. Do not offer the blood of a sacrifice to me along with anything containing yeast. Again, yeast is considered a sign of sin. The fat of my festival offerings must not be kept until morning. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Now that's an odd thing to say. Out of all the things he just said, and then he ends with, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. I mean, think about that for a second. That's kind of twisted. Like, really twisted. He says, don't do that. But here's the thing. I know when we're reading this, we're sitting there thinking, okay, well, that's kind of high and mighty. 3 times a year we have to see, go and celebrate you, and we can't come to you empty-handed. I mean, this doesn't sound like a loving God, okay? But again, we have to understand who we are, not just the Israelites, who we are, okay? I had somebody tell me, somebody close to me and everything, telling me about 2 or 3 years ago, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. Okay? I'm sure we probably all heard that at one time in our life. You don't have to go to church to be a Christian. To which I respond, well, that may be very true, but you're not going to be an effective Christian without a church. Okay? If God had not set these 3 festivals in place, if God had not made it a command for these 3 times a year that everybody is supposed to come together, bring offerings, worship God, what do you think would have happened to these people? They would have dispersed. They would have just gone their own way. They would have found other gods. God is using these 3 festivals to keep them a people. Okay? He is the center of the people. They are to be his priesthood. And he is doing everything to basically make that happen. He is basically making the 3 festivals: Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacle. Okay, he will have the 5 offerings, which will really embody the life and the life and death and crucifixion of Christ. He's doing all of this to bring these people together because they are to be his people. If he were to just sit there and say, look, I'm God, brought you guys out of Egypt, maybe you know me, don't do anything stupid, and I'll watch your back, and I got you. And every now and again, sacrifice a cow to me. I'd appreciate that. We would not be having the conversation that we're having now. There would be no church. There would be none of that stuff. Because people have it in their mind to go where the best thing is. They just would have gone to whatever was there in the particular moment. Jesus Christ himself sits there and says, if you follow me because you saw a miracle, that's not good. Okay, it's not good that you see some miraculous thing and you're like, wow, I got to be part of that. No. The miracle is the thing that makes you go, what is going on over there? And then as you go over there, you start to know Christ. You start to form that relationship. That relationship is the thing that keeps us in this faith. Okay, it's not the miracles. All right? And it's the same thing here. These guys just would have been whatever was flashy at the time. And you're going to see that over and over and over again. When they go across the river, when they cross the river Jordan and they go over to the Canaanites, there's a whole lot of new pretty ladies over there. And they're all young, and they all worship these weird gods. And some of these gods have really, really cool setups. Like one of them actually has this neat pole, and the way you worship them is having sex outside underneath that pole. That is a whole lot cooler than a bunch of thou shalt nots. Okay? So they follow that. And they get mixed up in that. And that is what God is trying to do. He is trying to keep a rein on everybody and say, look, this is who you are. And I have to remind you over and over and over and over again, not only who you are, but who I am. And that's what these are for. So it says, see, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to a place I have prepared. The angel is the angel of the Lord. It is the pillar of cloud and fire. It is Jesus Christ. So it says, do not rebel against him. He will not forgive your rebellion, since my name is in him. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Okay, I want you to remember this verse, okay? This is a Bible scholar thing and everything that's always touchy with me. Okay, a lot of scholars and a lot of just people that just don't know the difference between the writings and everything, and for whatever reason they switched what they called it. But a lot of people will sit there and say that the pillar of cloud and fire did not cross the river Jordan. Okay, did not cross it. He stayed back. That's not true. Instead of it being called the pillar of cloud and fire, it is now called the glory of the Lord. Okay? So it's the same thing. When it leaves, it's called the glory of the Lord. All right? Right here, it says it. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hivites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. Okay? He goes over there with them. So it says, do not bow down before their gods or worship them or follow their practices. It says, you must demolish them and break their sacred stones to pieces. Worship the Lord your God, and his blessing will be on your food and water. I will take away sickness from among you, and none will miscarry or be barren in your land, and I will give you a full lifespan. So in other words, do what I tell you to do, honor me, listen to me, and you guys are golden. I will take care of you. You don't do that, and there's going to be problems. So it says, I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. And I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. And I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive out the Hivites, Canaanites, and the Hittites out of your way. So this right here, this is perfect and everything for when we're going to learn about this in the book of Joshua. We're going to learn about how Jericho fell. And I already talked about this a long time ago. But just to give a quick recap, I will send my terror ahead of you. Okay? When they went into the land and they were scoping it out, they ran across the prostitute that they talked to. And the prostitute says, everybody is scared to death of your God. Okay? They know what happened to the Egyptians. When you crossed the Jordan River literally stopped flowing and flew upwards. Everybody saw that for 50 miles around. Everybody is terrified of you. Okay? Now, think about that. Even from not a spiritual aspect and everything, think about that for a second. If you're a general, okay, how great is that information to know that your enemies are absolutely petrified of you? That's the reason why Alexander the Great was able to conquer that entire part of the world in about 10 years, is because people were scared to death of him. He came across, they came out with gifts and offerings saying, "You've conquered us, hi." Okay, they did not play with him because they knew if they played with him, they were all going to die. And it was not a question of taking slaves. They were all going to die. Okay, he was not there to play games. Same thing here. He says, "I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run." Now, again, this is, you could call this speculation, but I've heard how Jericho has fallen 1,000 times over and everything. Oh, it was the horns. Oh, it was an angel. Oh, it was this. No, it was not. It was none of those things. Okay? You can easily tell how the walls of Jericho fell just by reading the story. Okay? The story is this. They come up to Jericho. Now, one thing we need to preface, Jericho's walls were not mortared. They were stone upon stone, big stone upon stone. That's what they were. So these people are terrified. They're all bound up inside the walls. Here comes the army. And the army sits there. And they're all looking. All the soldiers, the king, I'm sure, is up on the walls and everything like that. Okay? Now, the angel of the Lord tells them for 7 days, go around the town, go around the city, blow your horn, and go back and camp. The 7th day, I want you to go around the city 7 times, blowing the horn. And then turn around and shout like you've never shouted before. Okay? First day, everybody's up on the wall that needs to be up on the wall. They go around, they do nothing. They go camp out. What are they doing? Everybody else they're conquering. What are they doing? Second day, same thing. What are they doing? Third day, same thing. Okay, can somebody please go ask them what the problem is here? Fourth day, fifth day. By the 6th day, everybody in that town is up on these walls watching these people. 7th day, they go around. They're expecting them to go back to camp. They go around again. Now, this is taking hours, going around again, and again, and again, and again, and again. And the entire time, it is drawing all the people from the city up on the walls. Okay? Now you have thousands of people up on the wall watching the Israelites. The Israelites get far enough away to where everybody can see them, turn around, look, and with thousands of people up on that wall, they scream like they've never screamed before, and they start running. All those people up on that wall turn, and exactly like God says, I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. They turn their backs, they run this way. What happens to the ground when it's unsteady? When 1,000 people run that way, the wall goes this way. And that is exactly how the walls of Jericho fell. They did not fall inward, they fell outward. Okay? There are 2 types of miracles that we see in the Bible. There is the miracle of hit that rock and water is going to come out of it. So saith the Lord. Then you have the other miracle of do X, Y, and Z, and A, B, C will happen because of it. We saw that with Jacob and the goats. Okay? Do this. Do what I tell you to do. This is going to happen as a natural result. Nobody else knows this, but I'm God, so I got it, I read it out of the book. So, do this, you got it, okay? That's what happens here. He tells him to do exactly what he needs to do to enact that fear, and that fear causes Jericho to fall. And then they walk right in. Okay? That's how the walls of Jericho fell. So it says, but I will drive them out. I will not drive them out in a single year, because the land would become desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in the land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them or with their gods. They don't listen to that part. So it says, do not let them live in the land, or they will cause you to sin against me, because the worship of their gods will certainly be a snare to you. And we'll stop there, and I'm just going to comment on that real quick. So, a lot of people, Mr. Microphone is speaking. A lot of people that I've heard criticize the fact that God tells the Israelites to go into the land of Canaan and kill everybody. Men, women, and children. Okay? That sounds absolutely horrible. Okay? But again, we're looking at death like it's the end. God knows that it's not, number one. Number two, the other thing we have to realize is God knows how this works, and the Israelites don't. But the reality is that if they go into that land and they let anybody live, which they do, they mess up. If they let anybody live, that person is going to permeate the Israelites, and all of a sudden they're worshiping their gods. And you would sit there and think, well, they don't want to kill the children. No, it's not the children. It's the women. They're going into somebody's house and be like, hey, what's going on? Okay, I mean, that's literally what they're doing. They marry these women, and these women eventually teach them all about their wonderful gods. Baal, Sheol, Moloch is the one that is really, really bad. I'm trying to think. I have to research it and everything. For whatever reason, it's been so long since I've taught it, I can't remember the names. But there is a particular type of god that is worshipped over there that essentially has what is called Asherah poles. And that is the one that God constantly condemns over and over and over again. Because, again, it's enticing, okay? Who do you want to worship? The God that sits there and says, thou shalt not, and gives you 613 laws that you have to abide by? Or the one that says, hey, all is good, have sex underneath this pole and everything like that. That's how you worship me. Okay, so that's exactly what was going on. They would get these women, and these women would be married and integrated, and it may not happen the next day, but eventually the man would stop worshiping God, and he would start worshiping their gods. It happened with Solomon, okay? Happened all the time. So he's telling them, he's trying to get this in their head. They all have to go. They have to go. Because if you let them stay, it's a more harsh teaching than what Jesus was teaching and everything when he sits there and says it's better to cut off your hand, throwing it in the fire. It's the same premise, okay? Get rid of it, because if you do not, it is going to spread, it is going to permeate, it is going to cause you to sin, and it's going to destroy you, okay? So as we go further down in Exodus and then in Leviticus, like I said, some of the things that we're learning sound really, really harsh, but we have to understand that there is, in fact, a reason for them. So I'll pray, and then we'll be done. Dear Lord, thank you so much. Once again, just thank you for your word. Thank you for the lessons that we learned today. Thank you for just learning about your laws and your wisdom. Lord, just please be with us as we go home. Please watch over us and help us get home safe. And just please be with us throughout the week. We all have different needs, and you know them all. And just please be with us, love us, and give us the grace that only you can give. And Lord, we just praise you for that. We just praise you for who you are and just everything that you do in our lives. And Lord, we love you so much. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.